Now, the U.S. is using an Italian island in the Mediterranean to launch surveillance aircraft into Libya. This is the island of Pantelleria in the southern Italy. Actually, now that I think about it, very, very close to where that Egypt airplane just came down. Poland is calling for permanent troops on the Russian border to counter Russian aggression, because we're putting all of our tanks and troops along the border with Russia because they're acting aggressively. 150 Danish soldiers to be stationed in Estonia to ward off Russian advances. What Russian advances? The only people advancing are all these NATO troops advancing up to the border with Russia. Do they really think we don't understand what's going on? Do they really think that we don't know who the aggressors are? Do they really think we are that stupid? Apparently, if this expose by Congressman X is the real deal, yeah. Washington, D.C. is still operating on the basis that we're all a bunch of idiots who will believe anything fed to us by the corporate media. NATO has announced their new war policy against Russia. Their goal is to encircle Russia. They're going to basically garrison Russia and cut it off from the rest of the world so we can keep that gosh darn ruble from interfering with the dollar and the euro. It's just absurd. They're trying to get a war. They're at least getting the Cold War back, because they missed the good old days of the 1950s and 1960s when they could just take gobs of money away from you for weapons and stuff and not have to actually worry about taking care of the roads and the quality of the water and anything like that. And all they had to do was wag Russians at you, and you would obediently wet yourself and fling your babies into whatever war zone the government was coming up with. And they yearn for those days. They miss those good old days. And they're trying to get them back. There's a big difference. Back in the 1950s and 1960s, the American people were very trusting of the government. And when the government said the Russians are bad and we're good, most people would go along with that. Today we know it's different. Kennedy actually nailed it on the head when he was talking about détente with Russia. We all walk on the same planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's future. They're just people. And they want the same things that we do, peace and prosperity. It's only these sociopaths in these high political offices that want to play the great game of world conquest and create a global government and sit on that golden throne and say, I'm the ruler of the world. I think we need to build a mental hospital for all these New World Orderists. And what we'll do is we'll set up all the patient rooms like throne rooms with curtains and drapes and lights and guys, with halberds standing guard. And there'll be a big golden throne, and we can put these people on the throne, and they can scream, I'm the ruler of the world all they want, and they'll be harmless because they're going to be inside this mental hospital. I think it's a good suggestion. They'll be happy. We'll be happy. We'll avoid the wars and economic devastation. I think it's a good idea. We need to work on that as a plan. Now, there's a British general, General Sir Richard Sheriff, at one time was the second highest NATO military officer. And he's out there openly saying that a nuclear war with Russia in 2017 is entirely plausible. It's perfectly reasonable. You might as well get used to it. And yeah, we're going to see some very important cities just vanish in a blinding flash of light. And there'll be radiation sickness and cancer and leukemia. But really, this is a very plausible thing for us to do. And I know why he's saying it. The United States, which is the primary armorer of NATO and supporter of NATO, is run down. It's exhausted. We don't have the 4 M's needed to prevail in war. We don't have the manufacturing. We don't have the money. We don't have the manpower. And we don't have the moral authority. And that means if they get a hot war going with Russia or China, on the day the U.S. government realizes they cannot prevail with conventional weapons, they'll start launching the nukes. And that's what this British general is trying to get us used to, the idea that, yeah, we're going to have a nuclear war. Nuclear war toe-to-toe with the Ruskies, to paraphrase out of Dr. Strangelove. So they're out there trying to sell you the idea that, yeah, nuclear war, sure, it's okay. Well, no big deal here. France is starting to show a little hesitation about what's going on. Now, as you know, the United States has built this very expensive European missile defense system and is talking about turning control over these missiles directly to NATO. France, for some reason, is not thinking this is a particularly good idea, and they're starting to drag their heels on that. There are indications that this attempt to encircle Russia may be in trouble because Algeria is starting to say we're not all that hot about what's going on in Europe and the United States, and they're starting to move closer to Russia because of a very simple reality. While the U.S. and Europe make war, Russia and China are making deals. Peace through commerce. Donald Trump is saying the same thing. I want to go back to being friends with Russia and China and just do trade, do business. Now, as you know, we're basically here at the Cannes Film Festival, which is, the big film festival of the entire world. And it does get politicized. And apparently, right on the red carpet, there was a protest regarding the ouster of Rousseff in Brazil, where they're saying this was a coup d'etat. And it certainly looks like it from where I'm sitting, because this is what the U.S. does. Overthrows the elected government of the people of a nation and imposes a puppet ruler. Now we know that Brazil's new so-called interim president, meaning he's permanent, is a CIA asset. That would be like having somebody who was with the KGB sitting in the White House. You can understand why the Brazilian people are very upset, along, of course, with the economic privations that they're being subject to. Now, the U.S., once again, is out there provoking China, sent a spy aircraft in to spy on Chinese actions. The Chinese sent an aircraft out to chase them away. The U.S. is out there saying, what you did was unsafe. The way your plane came close to ours was very unsafe, bad China. And China's saying, look, stay out of our skies, and we won't have to do that. Every time the U.S. does another provocation, the propaganda is going to be China made us do it. China's the bad person. How dare they defend themselves from our aircraft? We've got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're basically talking about how the U.S. keeps provoking China. The U.S. is desperate to get into a war against the ruble and the yuan before the U.S. economy really does implode and they can't stop it from happening. And the U.S. keeps pushing at China and pushing at China, and now they're trying to make a stink over the fact that China actually got up and got in the way of a spy plane. And the U.S. is trying to say, well, this is just a routine U.S. patrol. We're always patrolling around with these big airplanes with telescopes and antennas and radios and stuff. That's just normal behavior for the United States here. And, of course, China has a somewhat different view, saying that the aircraft was flying over China's province of Hainan and violating their airspace. Now, claiming that China is acting as a hostile power, pot, meat kettle, kettle, meat pot, the U.S. is considering ending the arms embargo with Vietnam to try and to basically start selling some of these overpriced, ineffective weapons to Vietnam, who probably are going to decide they need to go someplace else with their dollars, unless the U.S. gives them tons of foreign aid with which to buy these weapons, which means you're going to pay for them all. There may already be a hiccup in that because there has been a lot of unrest in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City, and the Vietnamese government is saying this is more of these U.S.-backed non-governmental organizations kicking up unrest, leading to the destabilization of the current government. And maybe that's what the U.S. was thinking. You know, we'll put in a new puppet government, we'll lift the arms embargo, and we have another asset there to use against those evil Chinese. But the U.S. is getting ready to do something really, really big because the Pentagon just ordered 177,000 of the armor plates that are used inside the body armor. When you have body armor, there's the outer part that's the Kevlar, but there's also a metal plate over the more vital organs to deal with ammunition that's designed to penetrate Kevlar. And so anytime they put out a huge order for something like this, it's because something is being planned that the current stockpiles cannot cover.